Yo, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is one titled "The Medic Who Fought a War Without a Weapon," and this has been suggested so much. I think one guy in particular, I forget his name. I wish I could remember his name. He was like commenting it for like 55 days straight now, and 99% of the time I see his comments, they have like 50 to like 100 likes. So people obviously want it, and he obviously wants it. Firstly, I wanted to say sorry it's taken so long to get to it. I'm a bit psychotic. I like sort of seeing people commenting 40 days, 50 days, and then just sort of letting them add a few more days. But it got to the point where I was actually like, nah, I should actually see this. And I do want to see this by simple history. I forget, have I seen this channel before? I don't really know. If I haven't, and maybe it's just a new channel that I can do more reactions to. But again, thank you for the suggestions. I appreciate it. And yeah, let's just get into this one. Quick shout out to my Instagram, my Twitter. Links in the description for those. Same for my Patreon. Links are all there. And yeah, let's just get into this one, man. My mic is down.
The medic who fought a war without a weapon. Desmond Doss was not your average hero. He would become a Medal of Honor recipient, the United States of America's highest and most prestigious military award, as a combat medic who saved many of his comrades' lives in battle without firing a single shot, because he didn't take a weapon into combat because of his religious beliefs.
Really?
Desmond Doss was born in 1919 in the state of Virginia and was raised as a strict Seventh-day Adventist, a Christian denomination that believed that Saturday was the Sabbath and that the second coming of Jesus Christ was imminent. They also believed strongly in nonviolence and a healthy diet, based typically on a vegetarian diet. Doss had been raised with a strict belief in the Bible, and when it came to the Ten Commandments, he took them to be the core values of how to lead his life.
Oh, wow.
When World War II started, he was conflicted as he believed the war was a just one, but he felt that to kill another human being under any circumstance was wrong. He was already employed as a joiner at Newport News Naval Shipyard, but nevertheless he joined the United States Army on April 1st, 1942. He could have requested a deferment, but he wanted to do his patriotic duty. He was assigned to an infantry unit.
Wait, what's the word you just said? Defer? What's this? Is that like the ability to stop yourself?
He could have requested a deferment.
Okay, I'm going to spell this wrong. Defer... I don't know how to spell it. Deform it? Not deformity. I can't spell it. Defer... Oh, there you go. The action or fact of putting something off to a later time postponement. Okay, so he could have postponed it. So does that mean he would have to go later, or would that just mean he could have just done something to stop himself from going to war? Because I mean, someone who's that peaceful, obviously, or not peaceful, who's against that kind of stuff, or is just has their certain beliefs to a really strong sort of level, it's hard to see them then sort of being forced into war, because that's like around the World War II, just how it was. And then he did it, but then he didn't fight with weapons, which is even crazier, and we're going to learn more about it, but I assume, well, actually, I don't know. How do you survive a war without a weapon?
But he wanted to do his patriotic duty. He was assigned to an infantry unit, the 77th Division, and presumed that his classification as a conscientious objector would not require him to carry a weapon. For Doss, one commandment of the Bible stuck with him the most: thou shalt not kill. He wondered why he was assigned as a rifleman and not in a medical role. His commanding officer tried to pressure Doss into carrying a weapon, as they thought he would be more of a liability than an asset in combat, but Doss refused. Interestingly, even for medics, which Doss would later become, it was common practice at the time to carry either an M1911A1 pistol or M1 carbine for self-defense purposes.
Jeez.
The rules go that a medic under the Geneva Convention is not forbidden from carrying a weapon, but if a medic fires his weapon, he stops being classed as a medic, and therefore can be legitimately fired upon by the enemy. The regimental chaplain, Captain Stanley, would soon understand Doss's protests and helped him transfer from rifleman to medical training. To make matters worse, his fellow soldiers mocked his religious beliefs. When he was reading the Bible daily and strictly observing the Seventh-day Adventist tradition of attending church every Saturday, Doss continuously requested to be allowed to have Saturdays off rather than Sundays in order to follow his Adventist beliefs that Saturday was to be observed as the Sabbath. In the end, Captain Stanley took this up with divisional headquarters, and it was decided that Aventis soldiers would have Saturdays off, just as the other men had Sunday off.
Jeez.
This in fact made Doss even more unpopular than ever with his fellow soldiers, as he was seen to have it easy. As he had Saturdays off, none were on base on Sundays to see him pull extra duties to make up for this. One of the squad's other soldiers summed up the company's feeling about him and his Saturdays off, complaining, "You get more passes than the general." As Doss was a strict vegetarian at a time when it was unusual, it meant that the rest of the unit viewed Doss with such distrust and hostility that one man in his unit even warned him ominously, "When we go into combat, Doss, you're not coming back alive."
I was kind of thinking that, like, back in the 1930s, 1940s, being a vegetarian would have been one of those things that's like, I mean, it probably was looked down upon back then, which is just a crazy thought, how vegetarians could be looked down upon. But back in those days, it's just a completely different sort of outlook in life, and it makes you realize how things have changed. But yeah, I was thinking when they said he was a vegetarian, I was just sort of assuming that was a very rare thing back in those, like, what, 80 years back, 90 years back, sorry. 80 years back? No, 90 years.
I'm going to shoot you myself.
8 years back.
Doss eventually became an Army combat medic, saying, "While others are taking life, I will be saving it." The turning point for Doss and his relationship with his company came with their first 25-mile march with full field pack and rifle, something they were expected to achieve in 8 hours. The other soldiers thought Doss would be having it easy as he would be carrying no rifle or ammo that day, but his 2 canvas medical bags were almost as heavy and much more awkward to carry than any rifle. As the march progressed, the men started to suffer from exhaustion, numerous blistered feet and dehydration, some even passed out. And all the time there was Doss, always with a helping hand, even to the extent that at the end of the march, he insisted on checking everyone's feet and administering medical aid where it was needed. By the end of that day, he had won the respect of his entire unit for his tireless devotion to his duty. For the first time, he was treated as one of their own. Doss, as the qualified combat medic of the unit, was now responsible for providing first aid and frontline trauma care on the battlefield. He would be assigned to accompany his unit into the war zone and be there with them on the front line at all times. This was soon to happen, for the 77th Division had had their first combat experience on May 11, 1943, and Doss and his comrades were urgently being trained up to replace the combat losses and help expand the division's strength. The 77th Division would end up being in combat officially for no less than 208 days, suffering a total of 9,212 casualties before the war would end. The Battle of Guam. Doss's first taste of combat was at the Battle of Guam, which was a bloody battle fought from July 21st to August 10, 1944, to recapture the U.S. territory of the island of Guam from a determined Japanese garrison of nearly 20,000 troops. Though according to the Geneva Convention, knowingly firing at a medic wearing a clear insignia is a war crime, the Japanese snipers and machine gunners tended to ignore this and saw combat medics as easy and valuable targets to gun down. So medics in the Pacific...
That's interesting. So gunning down medics I'm not against it. I think it's a really good thing, but it's just interesting how there are rules in war. Like, you can't shoot a medic whilst he's tending to someone else. It's a really interesting thought, but I guess it sort of shows some kind of sense or care and humanity still. I mean, it's hard to say when they're still at war, but anyway, the Japanese didn't follow those rules, but it's just interesting that there are rules. What happens if the person who then, like, someone kills a medic and then they're still alive, but people know who did it, and then they capture them? Will they, like, be imprisoned for life, or, like, how would that work?
Pacific Theater were often told to...
I mean, I guess they would because they're fighting against them anyway, but I don't know how you could sort of decide how to, like, just imprison people, or, like, enforce those laws.
Avoid wearing medical insignia in case it would make them more, not less, of a target. Doss was under fire nearly every day during the battle and was busy doing his part in saving lives. Guam had shown Doss how cruel war could be. As his unit was pushing forward through the jungle on their first day, a young, fresh-faced recruit spotted a fountain pen laying on the jungle floor and went to pick it up. Before anyone could warn him otherwise, a white phosphorus grenade exploded. The pen had been booby-trapped. The young man who had picked up the pen, his chest now a bloody mess, had blood pouring out of an open wound. Severe burns and sharp metal fragments covered his body, and he was going into shock. By some miracle, Doss managed to stabilize his condition, administering care and helping to evacuate him and 3 other soldiers who had been wounded by flying red-hot shrapnel. This was Doss's first taste of combat casualties. The U.S. casualties during the battle was truly appalling. Of the 59,000 U.S. troops who took part in the invasion, around every 1 in 6 were either killed or wounded.
Jesus, man.
The Battle of Leyte. Next, Doss and his unit was involved in the Battle of Leyte in the Philippines that ran from October 17th to December 26, 1944. A vicious and prolonged battle which started with a huge U.S. coastal bombardment and amphibious landing, followed by heavy fighting the more inland the Americans went. During a Japanese counterattack, a fellow medic, Clarence Glenn, had heard the call for a medic from a machine gunner. He left the cover and went into the open, into no man's land, to get the wounded man, and was himself hit. Glenn was Doss's friend from back home and he couldn't leave him there. So he and a litter bearer, Herb Schechter, went out to find the 2 wounded and dealt with them separately. Doss was attending the machine gunner who had a gash along his face while bullets whizzed overhead. Both of the wounded were alive. They made an improvised litter out of a poncho and tree branches to get the wounded men back to the aid station, but his friend Glenn would die before he made it. From this point on, Doss would not look at the face of the men he was treating in case it was another friend. Sadly, his friend Herb would be shot and killed when he and Doss were carrying a litter as their silhouette exposed them against the sky to the enemy. On top of losing his friends, Doss was constantly hungry because the meat in the K rations conflicted with his vegetarianism, so he could only eat the tasteless crackers and coconuts he found. On Leyte, the coconuts on the ground gave him diarrhea, so he climbed the trees for fresh ones. At one point, Doss was looking for coconuts. It attracted poorly aimed Japanese machine gun fire. When they were killed by American soldiers, it was later discovered that they had been drunk on sake. One thing that shocked Doss during the most devastating times of the campaign was that the same man who had made threats towards him during training at Fort Jackson now came to him for guidance and to pray for him.
Crazy how things change, isn't it?
The Battle of Okinawa. And lastly, for Doss and the 77th Infantry Division was a battle that was to be the bloodiest battle of the war in the Pacific, as well as its largest amphibious landing. The U.S. objective was to secure the island as a base, as it was just 350 miles south of the Japanese mainland and would be strategically crucial for any future invasion of Japan. The battle started on April 1st, 1945, exactly 3 years to the day that Doss first enlisted in the Army, and the battle was to last 81 days. Doss was assigned to the 1st Battalion as their combat medic. On April 29, 1945, the 77th Division was given the task of assaulting on a 400-foot-high cliff called the Maida Escarpment. This was nicknamed by the Americans as Hacksaw Ridge. Before they climbed the cargo net, Doss said a prayer for his comrades. When Doss's unit joined the assault, and as they neared the top of the escarpment, they came under intense Japanese artillery, small arms, and machine gun fire, inflicting severe casualties on the assaulting American troops. The American forces had sent in wave after wave of troops to try to dislodge a fanatical enemy base there, who were well entrenched and camouflaged. On May 4th, while his unit was attacking a heavily fortified enemy position at the mouth of a cave, Doss went to the aid of 4 of his injured comrades. The lieutenant who led the attack on the emplacement had intended to throw a grenade when an enemy bullet hit him and delayed it, blowing his hand off and wounding his comrades. Despite having to get within 25 feet of the enemy lines and under attack by enemy grenades and gunfire, Doss managed to get to the injured men. He then managed to evacuate the men back to his own lines, one by one. During the night, the Japanese continued to throw grenades and kept up the mortar fire. The American soldiers hid in rock crevices, but the Japanese found ways to infiltrate and sneak up on them. Then, on the next day, May 5th, he came to the rescue of a wounded artillery officer who had gone to see how the artillery guns were doing. Doss's left leg was now injured, as he had fell the day before down the edge of a parapet. He climbed up the cargo net with his first aid kits, his weight falling on his bad leg. Finding him in a shell hole, the officer had been struck by shrapnel that had made a hole from his chest to his back, and Doss could hear him breathing through it. He was bleeding heavily.
Oh my god.
Doss gave him first aid while under constant enemy gunfire and shelling. He put the dressings over the large holes in the colonel's chest and back, and administered blood plasma which dangerously exposed Doss to the enemy, as he had to hold it up high. Doss's efforts here would be in vain, as the colonel, carried back on a stretcher, died before he reached the aid station. Later, there were orders to take a vital Japanese pillbox position on the reverse slope of a hill that was holding up the American advance. Desmond Doss, once he had read his prayers, was happy to support the assault. The American troops threw gasoline cans at the position, which triggered a large explosion. All of a sudden, a large Japanese counterattack overwhelmed the American soldiers, causing them to panic and rush back to the edge of the cliff. But despite this, Doss refused to take cover, and while constantly under heavy fire by the enemy, though being totally exhausted, he spent hours carrying the wounded one by one to the edge of the escarpment. Then, to get the more severely wounded down, he tied a rope to a tree stump and lowered them down the cliff on a rope-supported stretcher to safety. When the stretcher kept slipping, he turned to a new method, looping the rope around the wounded men's chest and legs to lower them down. Doss, standing, exposed to potential enemy fire, was seen praying at the cliff edge as the men were being lowered down. And later he had said he had been praying to the Lord to help him get one more, and after that, one more, until they were all down. Calculating the wounded men at the base of the cliff, the captain worked out that Doss had saved around 75 men. The Americans would eventually go back up the cliff and on May 7th would take the position. By some miracle, Doss survived the whole battle totally unhurt, but that was soon to change. On May 21st, in the confusion of a night attack, Doss tended to the American wounded, risking being hit by both the Japanese and by friendly fire. Doss was in a shell hole with another American soldier when a grenade landed beneath him. His reflex action was to put his foot on it and was seriously wounded in both legs. His blood poured out from the impact of 17 pieces of shrapnel in his body. But he remained in his position for 5 hours, tending to himself while also helping others who were wounded, until a medic and a pair of litter bearers could get to him. But that was not the end of it that day, for as he was being stretchered to safety, they got caught in an enemy tank attack. As they took cover, Doss spotted a critically injured man and insisted that he be taken back on the stretcher instead of himself. While Doss waited for the litter bearers to return, he was found and helped back by a fellow soldier. Suddenly, Doss was hit by a Japanese sniper's bullet and suffered a compound fracture to his arm. The two men took cover in a shell hole. Realizing how badly injured he now was, Doss instructed the soldier on how to bind his rifle stock to his shattered arm to act as a splint. Eventually pushing through excruciating pain, he would make it back to the aid station.
Oh my god.
The U.S. Army recognized Doss's extreme bravery, and he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroic and selfless actions at Okinawa from April 29th to May 21st, 1945. Because of his heroic actions, many wounded men made it back home. Desmond Doss would go on to run a small family farm with his wife Dorothy, and lived to the age of 87.
Wow. I mean, what an absolute legend, bro. Now I know why this was suggested so much. This was incredible, bro. That one teammate with 0 kills but the highest score by just reviving and healing. Legit, bro. Me after watching this Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss was a goddamn badass. Me after watching this, this movie was underrepresenting him. I mean, yeah. I don't think there's any way to fully represent how scary and how much of a hero this sort of person, how scary it must have been for them, but how much of a hero they actually genuinely are. Like, you can't. It's just, I don't know how someone has the courage and the ability to pull themselves through that kind of situation, man. Soldier near death, Doss. Yeah, we don't do that. Honestly, bro. Japanese soldier, I got killed. Doss. Well, yes, but actually no. So basically, Doss is doing pacifist run on veteran difficulty. Soldier dying noises. Doss, I'm about to save this man's whole career. I love YouTube comments so much, man. Just one more. When in the haze did I get this many likes? Imagine Imagine how many generations of his family he saved. Of families, not his family, of families he saved, sorry. Dos arrives in heaven. Jesus, well, I want to say I'm a huge fan. I mean, legend, man. Absolute legend. This is incredible, but yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Again, if there's any more videos out there, I'm going to... I have subscribed to the channel. Did I just do it? I mean, if there's any other videos from this channel you want me to see, please let me know, because this was incredible. This was put together really well. The storytelling was incredible. And the whole the whole idea of it was just really interesting to learn about. And again, like I said 100 times, the suggestions, thank you so much for them. Hopefully you can get some more crazy good videos to see. And yeah, start learning about more things basically. But hopefully you enjoyed them. Until next time, like, subscribe, peace.